Hi, I'm Mary Elaine Petrucci. Welcome to Caregiver Cast. My special guest tonight is Peg Duchesne, who will be discussing what it means to be a caregiver because she had taken care of her mother for a long time. And she'll share some insights with us about her caregiving journey. Before I formally introduce Peg, I would like to give you some information about her background. Peg Duchesne is the owner and founder of Duchess Enterprise, LLC, which is a communications and marketing company founded in 2007. Peg is from Maryland, was born at Bethesda Naval Hospital, and grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland, a suburb of Washington, D.C. Peg is a proud alumna of St. Mary's College of Maryland, the National Public Honors College, where she currently serves on the Board of Trustees. Peg recently relocated from Southern Maryland to Chestertown, Maryland, across the Chesapeake Bay Bridge on the eastern shore of the state. Peg is a content creator, communications coach, and marketing strategist who helps develop and deliver the marketing message for her clients who range from entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, small business professionals, as well as those involved with education. Peg is known as a consummate networker and connector. She has a heart of service, and people describe her as a giver. Speaking of service, she served for over 16 years in the Maryland Army National Guard, first as a company clerk for a medical unit, then as an Army medic, and finished her career as a medical logistics officer at the rank of captain. For 6 years, she was the primary caregiver of her mother, who gallantly battled Parkinson's disease. Peg will speak with us about the gifts that caregiving brings, as well as the challenges that caregivers face in the day-to-day struggles. She has some practical tips as well as some insights she will share about what she learned in that role and along her caregiving journey. At the very end, Peg has two amazing gifts for us. One of which is an acrostic composition about being a caregiver, and the other is a simple 90-second quiz that will provide an in-depth personality report about how you like to communicate and how you best receive information. And Peg will tell us at the very end of her interview how we can reach her. So welcome, Peg, to Caregiver Cast.
Thank you so much, Mary Elaine. It's really a privilege to be here and share the things I learned as I was a caregiver for my wonderful mom.
I know it's really hard to be a caregiver. I was doing it for both my parents, so I understand what you were feeling and what you had, what you went through. However, I know every caregiving journey is really unique. So could you tell us more about your decision to be a caregiver for your loved one?
Sure. It really wasn't a decision, I would say, just more of a calling. My mom was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and she had said, even before the diagnosis, she had always said she and my dad had built a lovely home on the banks of Breton Bay in Maryland, and it's a beautiful home, beautiful sunsets. And she said, I just want to stay here for the rest of my days. I don't want to go to a home if at all possible. She's the mother of 8. I'm the firstborn of those 8. She didn't want to burden anybody with going to their home and having to, infiltrate her into their daily life. She just wanted to, she called it stay put in her wonderful home. And so when she was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and it's a debilitating disease that just gets some worse and worse as things go on, I really felt the calling to move in with her and be her primary caregiver. So I wouldn't say it was a decision, it was more a calling. It sort of was tapped and told, this is what your purpose is for the next who knows how long. But I was gifted to be able to as a solopreneur, I was able to delegate some of my work to virtual assistants or collaborative partners and sort of put a lot of my work on the back burner, still doing some of it as time would allow. But it was a luxury to be able to provide that wish for her and let her wish come true and stay there till the end.
Definitely. And I'm sure your mother really appreciated you being there and knowing that you had this calling and you needed to be there with her. So I really commend you for that.
Thank you.
While you're doing caregiving, how did you know what needed to be done for your mother?
Well, some of the things, sort of the hands-on kind of medical things, I was an Army medic. And so I had some, first aid and emergency care and kind of tender, loving care kind of skills from that portion of my life. We were blessed to have, for a period of time, Mom was under the care of occupational therapists and physical therapists. So they showed us both how we could maneuver getting her into bed as she declined in her mobility, best ways to get on and off a chair, just all those kinds of things. So whenever she had a session, I would be right there watching and learning and helping her navigate what they were teaching us. And then with Parkinson's, the repetition helps. And so keeping her doing the same things the same way would be helpful. And so with the help of the professionals like the occupational and the physical therapists and those kinds of things, we learned together how to cope and to manage. And as her progression got worse, we'd have to have them come in and show us, now that this has happened, what's another good way to maneuver and pivot and those kinds of things. But with the help of professionals, I was able to help her in all the ways she needed.
That's amazing. I think it's really important that a caregiver be there when you have a therapist coming in, so that you both, like you said, can learn together. So you're doing the same thing and not confusing the person by trying it a different way. You mentioned something that's a little curious to me anyway, is how do you, or did you, infuse happiness and joy in every day? I know it's really hard to do that, and that's would have been my goal as well. However, that's a very difficult thing to do. So how were you able to do that?
I promised my mother we would laugh every day. Sometimes we would cry, but we would at least laugh once or more times a day. Sometimes we'd be laughing at the two of us trying to remember what they showed us to do, and it wasn't working right as we were implementing new systems into practice. But every day I would think of something funny, share something with her that would make her laugh. We would listen to music every day. Lots of times as I was getting her dressed, we would be playing songs. And she was a great singer. She could harmonize like nobody's business. And she didn't have the tremors of Parkinson's, which in a way was a blessing, but one of her mini strokes affected her throat, and she had swallowing issues and those kinds of things, and away her ability to sing. It was really a heartbreak. But we would always play music, and she would hum along or tap her foot or, try to sing, even though she really couldn't too much. I try to infuse some kind of happiness and joy into every day. And some days, like you're saying, Mary Elaine, it got to be really hard because you knew there was no good outcome. The end is the end. And but you just have to keep a positive mental attitude. And we were blessed. My dad and mom had gotten long-term care insurance, so it wasn't me 24 hours a day. Have helped sometimes 5 or 6 or 8 hours on some days, and I would have to I would get to go to a meeting or do some networking or something, keep my toe in my business a little bit and take a break. But on those days, even on 8 hours, there's still a lot of hours left in a 24-hour day. were blessed with that. So I was able to get out a little bit, nothing like I did before I moved in with her, but keeping my connections, and with social media and those kinds of things, the telephone, I would try to take advantage of when we had help in the home. I would go make some phone calls and keep connected with my friends and colleagues. And that was a big boost for me in my morale. And that let me feed into her, and I'd get to share conversations with people she knew about and update her on those kinds of things. But those are how we manage the day-to-day grind, I would say.
Okay. I know that it's hard when you see a person go through those changes and you see the decline. It's I know it's really hard, but I think it's, if you could think of that person like you did your mom, in terms of who they were and what they enjoyed doing, and you participated in those activities with them, I think made them feel like they were still able to participate and enjoy life as much as they could. So thank you for that. So what recommendations would you give to someone who's starting out on this caregiving journey that goes up and down?
I would recommend, as I said, staying connected with your friends as much as possible. This pandemic sure has thrown a loop into everything. We used to have people come and visit my mom frequently. She didn't lose her mental capacities much. She, the forgetful little things, but she didn't have dementia or Alzheimer's or anything. It was just the mobility issues and her throat that were really the crippling factors of her daily life. As much as you can, keep them engaged, keep them involved, keep them in conversation. If they start to watch TV and you see their eyes glaze over, my mother was never a big TV watcher. She loved Hallmark movies, or she'd like to catch up on the news, but never a whole lot of, she loved The Voice. But, keeping her engaged, active, in conversation. We'd get the newspaper and I'd make her read the headlines, and then I'd read the fine print of whichever story she'd want to know about more, those kinds of things. I also wish I had known, you probably weren't doing this. Mom just died a year ago, but you probably weren't doing this back then, or I wished I'd known about groups like this. I did find it helpful. There were a few Facebook support groups for caregiving, and those have been very helpful. And I'm still engaged with several of them, giving support back to others who are on this journey that I experienced, and those kinds of things. So those are some of the tips I would recommend. And then, if you love music, find a song that will transport your mind for even just a few minutes to a happier place when it gets to be a struggle, and try to get beyond, and know that the gift you're giving your loved one, or the person for whom you're caring, if you're in a job caregiving, truly a gift, that they will know they're well cared for as a result of your hard work. So those would be my suggestions.
Fantastic. And how were you able to keep that momentum going with your mother year after year for 6 years? How did things change?
The biggest changes were, it took more strength on my part to move her and lift her, get her in and out of bed, on and off the toilet, in and out of the chair to eat. When she went from a walker and a rollator and then to an actual wheelchair, all those kinds of progressions, you just knew that we're getting closer and closer to the end. But I was blessed to be able to keep her living for as long as we did. And I think, we made some good healthy meals, and her nutrition was good. We kept her hydrated, all those kinds of things that they say are important. And I truly believe that she lived longer because of the engagement, and knowing that she was in her home and just loved. And we always tried to do something to get her out in nature, or at least out to the window to see, depending on the time of year, because Maryland, it can get pretty cold in the winter and really hot in the August month of summer, those kinds of things. But try to capitalize on as much beauty and joy, and give them the kinds of things they always liked in their life before it took this turn for whatever they're facing towards the end.
Thank you for sharing that. I know my mother developed like this rose garden up on either side of the walk to the house. And we would go to the botanic gardens and go to the rose garden, and we would just like smell and touch. And I think she really enjoyed doing things like that. Or if I took her to like the mall to walk, because that was one of her favorite things to do with a friend of hers. So you're right, you have to keep them engaged. And you were fortunate to have like friends or people, acquaintances that came over to see you. I think that's really the hard part. My mother had Alzheimer's, so I think a lot of people felt like they couldn't really communicate with her any longer. So do you have any tips around something, a caregiving situation like that?
My tip would be make the person you're caring for feel as comfortable as possible. My mother would get phone calls from time to time, or we would schedule calls with family members or loved ones or former neighbors, those kinds of things. And she would always say, you'll be with me for the call. And she would ask that I please keep it on speaker, because sometimes she wouldn't be able to fully comprehend what they were saying, or she'd need it repeated and those kinds of things. Whatever you need to do to make them feel as comfortable as possible, because they're the one you're giving the love and care for.
Mhm.
And, when people would come, she'd always want me. And I'd say, I think you two are doing great. I'm going to go take a 10-minute break and give you some privacy. She would appreciate that, but we sort of had a signal. She would pull on her ear a little when, she'd say, it's time for this person to go or something like that. And, just my best advice would be make that person feel as comfortable as they can feel in whatever the situation is.
Mhm. I would agree with that. My mother did a lot of embroidery, and she did do some needlework and crocheting. And one of my cousin's wives was showing her how to make granny squares. Well, I didn't know how to do that, and we were like about 2.5 hours away. And so I took her and took mom and her caregiver, and we went and to a knit shop and had a lesson. So I think, so at least she had somebody who could possibly help her if she would get stuck. But she was like so determined to do as much as she could for as long as she could. And I agree with you. You just kind of have to follow their lead and do as much as you can with them, depending on what they're able to do. So what is your best advice or your closing thoughts about what caregiving really means, and how one should probably think differently, not differently about the person, but just think of them going through each stage and accepting them for like who they are? So can you give us some ideas about what thoughts you have regarding that, and what final advice you could give to people, to caregivers?
Sure. So the first part of your question, I would say, as we've been saying, remember who they were in their earlier years, tap into what they liked to do back then, and let them do as much of that as is possible and is safe. And as is rewarding, they may decide they don't like that anymore. But for as long as they want to, I think it's important to keep them engaged in those kinds of activities, and keep them engaged in conversation, and tell them about different things that happen. And mom would love to go to the grocery store just to be out and about and be pushed around and see all the new things, just however you can involve them, that would be my suggestion. And then for the caregiver themselves, just like I said earlier, find ways to give yourself even a 10-minute respite. Go take a breath of fresh air, look at what's happening out in the world, smell a flower, like you said, talk to friends, stay connected as much as you can, because it can be very isolating for sure when you're caregiving. And And it can be depressing, and you need to sort of get yourself out of that so that you don't transfer it to the person you're caring for,
Mhm.
and give them as much love and TLC, tender love and care, as you can throughout the day and throughout the night. And it can be exhausting, both physically and emotionally, mentally. And you
Mhm.
need to find ways to recharge your own batteries as well.
Great advice, both about caregiving and what self-care for yourself. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You have some free offers for our listeners. Could you explain what those are, please?
I do. So I I think it was before Mom died, because I remember sharing it with her. Maybe I only shared the draft, but I did a composition using each of the letters of caregiver as the first word and the first line of the composition. So there's that gift, which is the power and the benefit both to the person receiving your care as well as to us, the caregiver, rendering the care. And so that's my gift to our listeners today. And also this personality assessment, which is a great tool for communications. We all know about the golden rule: treat you the way I want to be treated. But the platinum rule, which not very many people have heard of, is treat the other person the way they want to be treated. And so this assessment takes 90 seconds and can be an insight into who you are and how you like to communicate and what's important to you in terms of values. And then we can speak to one another based on the values we all cherish the most. And we're all, it's not like you're one or the other, you're all part of the 4 value sets. But knowing what you like to lead with, it will come as no surprise that my lead value is nurturing. So I got the tap on the shoulder and the call to, step in and be the caregiver for my mom. But it's a great way to understand yourself better, and then to understand other people better and communicate better.
Thank you very much. I did read that poem, and it's fantastic because it does have a lot of nurturing characteristics in it that a caregiver needs to either develop or have innately. And yes, communication is the biggest thing. I think the biggest tool that you can bring when you're caregiving, because it's really what you think, what you say, how you say it, can determine whether you're going to have a good day or not.
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
Thank you so much for being on Caregiver Cast. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing what you had gone through with your mother for 6 years, and just giving us some pearls of wisdom that we all need when we're going through that journey. So thank you again.
And thank you for the opportunity. And thanks for doing the Caregiver Cast, because it's such a much needed resource for people that are rendering care and need to know how to proceed, and that they're doing a great job. So keep up the good work in what you're doing in terms of caregiving, not just you, but the caregivers listening in and watching.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It's not an easy journey. It's not something that you think you're ever going to be involved in. And so it really changes you when you go through it and help somebody that you really truly care for.
Amen.
So thank you.
Thank you.